In just a couple days, we'll be receiving a new promo pack tied to a new PvE event similar to the previous Lapras event, which gave us our promo Mankey and our promo Lapras EX. It was a really fun event, and it was exciting to get our hands on our very first new cards in Pokemon Pocket that weren't a part of Genetic Apex, and as a part of the deal, we even got some cool alternate arts. Our second set of promo cards are coming in just 2 days at the time of me recording this video, maybe a little bit less by the time you see this video. The promo pack's going to feature Venusaur, Greninja, and Onix, which are all just alternate arts of their existing versions that are currently in the game via Genetic Apex. I will say, I especially wish that Onix was getting a bit more love this time around. Don't get me wrong, his alternate art is cool, but the card really struggles at a 3-cost 70 damage, 110 HP, which is, the HP is pretty good, but 4-cost retreat on a 3-cost 70 damage is just, honestly, it's just not enough. But I guess Onix will have to wait another day to be able to really shine. Maybe once we finally get a Steelix, we'll get an updated version of Onix or something like that, or maybe just a Steelix is enough to push Onix into viability. But for now, Onix honestly feels like one of the worst cards in the game. I'll also add that it's kind of weird that the big chase card this time around is a baby Venusaur. Don't get me wrong, it's a fun collector's item and the artwork is absolutely beautiful, but baby Venusaur is kind of unplayable, and I don't expect that to change anytime soon, so it's kind of annoying. I don't have much to say about Greninja. I really like his new artwork, but the actual content of the image and the pose that Greninja is making is almost identical to his base art. We are getting 2 brand new cards as a part of this promo pack that I haven't mentioned yet, and that's Haunter and Jigglypuff. Haunter, compared to his Genetic Apex version, has minus 10 HP, but has plus 20 damage with a downside of 50% of the time missing. Jigglypuff is a completely different card to the Genetic Apex version of Jigglypuff that we have. She has 10 less HP, 1-cost attack as opposed to a 2-cost attack, so 50% less of a cost. You get to attack a whole turn sooner, minus 30 damage, but her attack now reads, your opponent's active Pokemon is asleep. Let's take a moment to examine both of these 2 cards, and then I'll give you a deck list that I'm going to be using on day 1 for each of them. So I don't think either of these 2 decks are going to be optimized. It's just kind of the starting point that I'm going to be using for both Haunter and Jigglypuff. Haunter is pretty interesting to think about because generally you want Gengar to be protected until he's set up and ready to go. So you don't typically want to be fighting as Haunter. Typically you just want him on the bench. So you might think that the plus 20 damage is relatively inconsequential, especially for something that has such a huge risk tied to it, which is that it might deal 0 damage. But actually I think that plus 20 damage is more compelling when you evaluate it through that lens of, well, it's just going to be on the bench anyway. If you're in a scenario where 30 damage attack couldn't kill a target, but a 50 damage attack could kill a target, moving Haunter from the bench to the active position to be able to take that attack and go for that 50% chance to potentially KO something, that's just an option that you previously wouldn't even have. And that's why I do think that the new Haunter is a considerable option over the current Haunter. But really, the question simply comes down to, does that extra piece of utility of having more reach, having a higher ceiling of damage, is that enough to sacrifice the 10 HP compared to the Genetic Apex Haunter? Well, 70 is an interesting number to consider. 70 does survive a good number of sources that 80 does as well, so there's only a few things that make the difference. For example, surviving a source of 50 damage is the same whether you're at 70 or 80. Surviving a source of 60 damage is the same whether you're at 70 or 80. Surviving 2 sources of 30 damage, so like 2 30 hitters in a row, or even 3 20 hitters in a row, these all mathematically add up to 60, so 70 is surviving all of that. Obviously, Giovanni makes that math a little bit different, but really the breakpoint to think about is stuff like Rapidash Blaine, which equals 70, obviously, and things like Voltorb and Golduck, these kind of 2-cost 70 damage attackers, which will be killing just the new Haunter, and the old Haunter would be living through them. Again, obviously that situation changes a little bit with Giovanni, but for this type of math, I think it's best to ignore Giovanni. So yes, I think there's a compelling case for both Haunters. I do lean a little bit towards the new Haunter, the promo Haunter that we're getting in just a couple days now. I do lean towards that one being ever so slightly better, but it's a close call either way, and I don't think it's going to move the needle very much on Gengar. I still think Gengar will be a relatively unpopular card that doesn't see a lot of play because it's just not strong enough in the current context of the game. Moving on to Jigglypuff. Jigglypuff is such a unique piece of utility that doesn't exist elsewhere. Well, it kind of exists elsewhere. There isn't much of a reason to compare Jigglypuff promo to Genetic Apex Jigglypuff. I'll be shocked if the 30 damage 2-cost Jigglypuff sees play over the 1-cost Sleeper. Even if the HP is less, right? The new Jigglypuff has less HP, and it's kind of an annoying breakpoint. There's a lot of things that deal 50 that don't deal 60. A 2-cost attack is simply just embarrassing for 30 damage. So if we're going to be running Wigglytuff, so if you're running Wigglytuff in your deck, you're probably running promo Jigglypuff, and you're probably never running Genetic Apex Jigglypuff. Now, I'm relatively confident about that, but there is a massive difference between 50 and 60 HP. There's so many things that deal exactly 50 that you're not surviving because you're at 50 HP as opposed to 60. It's really difficult to explain just how big the difference is, but think about it from the lens of, say, something like Mewtwo that deals 50 damage. There's so many things in the game that have 60 health that Giovanni is a double auto-include in every Mewtwo list because it makes Mewtwo's base damage on his 2-cost ability jump up to 60, which is obviously such a big breakpoint. That's not a breakpoint they have to consider for your Jigglypuff because your Jigglypuff, well, your Jigglypuff is a weakling at just 50 HP. It's easy to look at it and say, well, it's just a 10 HP difference, but there's a massive difference between 50 and 60 when you look at the types of damage that things are doing, especially during the early stages of the game in Pokemon Pocket. Now, obviously, I want to mention that Jigglypuff, our new promo Jigglypuff, could see play outside of decks running Wigglytuff. Jigglypuff is a super interesting tech piece. Sadly, she obviously only has 50 health, so you can reasonably assume that if the opponent's Pokemon's waking up, Jigglypuff is probably dead. But the fact that you can just throw out one energy onto Jigglypuff, that's enough for her retreat, and it's enough for her attack. You can have this juiced up Jigglypuff who's ready to do everything she can, retreat, attack, whatever. You can have her sit in the active, all while you're busy setting up your Dragonite or any other big energy sink that you have available to you at the time. That type of status condition where you're skipping your opponent's turn, essentially, you're skipping their attack, there isn't anything like that on a basic Pokemon right now. The other options that are in the game that do similar things, they have significantly more investment. Baby Articuno has a 3-cost energy investment, Snom has a 2-cost energy investment and requires evolving, Pinkerchin is a 2-cost energy investment. Not to mention, of course, that Jigglypuff does this all while being colorless, so she'll never have to conflict with your deck's energy spread. The viability of this type of effect is unclear to me. It's unclear to me how powerful this type of effect will be, and it's unclear to me what type of decks will want to utilize this outside of, say, something like Dragonite. But what is clear to me is that this is the lowest level commitment for this type of effect that we've ever seen in Pokemon Pocket. From a deck building perspective, this card is very, very low commitment. It's just a basic Pokemon slot. From an energy cost perspective, it's really, really low commitment. It's just one energy. And even from a card required to draw perspective, it's very efficient. You only need to draw just Jigglypuff to get this engine online, this sleep engine online. So I do expect to see Jigglypuff see some amount of play eventually, even if it doesn't quite make the cut into competitive lists right away. As for deck lists, this is the Gengar list I would recommend to you. Honestly, what I would recommend is that you don't play Gengar. I don't think Gengar is a good card, but if you wanted to play Gengar, I think the list should look something like this. The idea with Gengar is that we want him in the active spot because he needs to be in the active spot to activate his ability, and he's a high health Pokemon, meaning that he can sit in the active slot for longer than other Pokemon. Honestly, he doesn't really have the burst damage to get there. 100 damage for 3 cost is extremely expensive. So even though I don't think he's the best Pokemon to sit in the active spot, that is what he wants to be doing. And we don't have room to include other engines in our list that might be better off being in the active slot, say something like a Mewtwo and Gardevoir, or really anything else among Psychic or Colorless cards. Anything that would be competing for Gengar's slot in the active spot that could be maybe better at soloing out the game, or it could be maybe doing something that supports Gengar in some way. All of those things are going to be taking up too many deck slots. And in conclusion, I'm just running the Meowth to help me find the Gengar, and we're just kind of hoping that Gengar is enough. We're running the single Pokédex as well to help with our consistency. Pokédex lets you look at the top 3 cards of your deck, decide whether or not you want to draw them. If you don't want to draw them, you can play Pokeball to shuffle your deck. If you do want to draw them, you can just draw them and hold on to your Pokeball for a future play until you've drawn those cards that you want. For example, let's say I have Meowth on the active slot and I have a Ghastly on the bench. I've got Gengar in my hand. I need to find Haunter. I have a Pokeball and Pokédex. I Pokédex. I see that there's a Haunter in my top 3 cards. I'm going to hold that Pokeball and wait until I draw the Haunter to then play the Pokeball because I don't need the Pokeball right now. I've already got a Ghastly on the bench. It's not particularly important for me to go find another Ghastly or another Meowth. Pokédex is giving me that information, so I want to avoid shuffling my deck. Maybe I use Professor Oak or I use Meowth's ability to help me draw into that Haunter a little bit faster. Then I can play that Pokeball within my deck or do whatever else I want to do. Pokédex is not the best card, but as long as you've got a deck list like this that is really just looking for a 20th or 18th card that they really want to put in their deck, Pokédex feels like a fine slot, especially when we're so reliant on getting our full Gengar engine going. As for our second deck list, this is kind of a variation on my Sleepy Dragonite build that has been getting relatively popular recently, which has been fun to see. Jigglypuff is taking the role of Hypno in this list. I don't know if this will be better than just running the Hypno. Honestly, I expect it to be the case that I end up cutting Jigglypuff from this list and run Hypno. Hypno being able to resolve from the bench is just so much better than having to have the Pokemon in the active slot, especially because it gives up a prize card, which feels really bad now that we're running double Weezing in this list as well, because, you know, the more prize cards we give up or the more prize points we give up, the scarier our scenario is. Honestly, prize points are particularly important when playing a traditional Sleepy Dragonite list because generally it's just like, is Dragonite dead? Is Dragonite not dead? But because we run so many more Pokemon in this list, there is a real risk that enough of our Pokemon die before Dragonite gets going that we lose enough prize points. So you need to be careful about the number of Pokemon you're putting onto the board. Honestly, I don't love Weezing normally in Dragonite lists. I just think if you're going to be running the Jigglypuff, this list probably makes more sense than, say, trying to do something with Hypno. But I still think there's a chance that Hypno is just better in the Dragonite list. But like I said, this is going to be my starting point for Jigglypuff once she releases in just 2 days. So anyway, that's everything I have to say about the upcoming Jigglypuff and Haunter. Let me know what you think about the 2 upcoming cards, and let me know what you think of the upcoming event in general. Thank you so much for watching, keep being awesome, and I'll catch you in the next one.